Hi everyone, this is the lecture for Early Hominin Genera. So you might be wondering about some of those words. So I think we talked about before what hominin is, and genera is just the plural of genus. So this is a fairly short PowerPoint, so the lecture should be pretty short too. Although I think assigned, the same day you have this assigned, there's like another video, a couple of videos you have to watch, but they're all shorter than they usually are, which is why I put them all together on the same day. Okay, so you have, let's see, Early Hominin Genera, slide 2. So hominins, so remember that this is everything in the, my camera acting up. Okay, everything in the human lineage since they're split with chimpanzees. So recall that, about 6 million years ago, humans split with chimpanzees. They evolved in their own evolutionary trajectory. Our lineage evolved along ours, and there have been multiple species, multiple branching events, species that died out. It's not just like, this nice linear event at all. And we're going to get into some of that. But everything in our lineage since they're split with chimps, whether they are our direct ancestor or not, they're still considered hominins. Yes, and we talked about, yes, the previous one we talked about the characteristics, that's the suite of traits, the 6 characteristics. Okay, it was just a couple days ago, Alicia, pay attention. Okay, so slide 3. So like I said, I think before, even like in the previous video, I said the same thing, but I'll say it again. So like it's kind of nice to imagine that we're like, oh yeah, we have chimps and humans, and it's a nice straight line with our last common ancestor. Like we can think of it like this, and then of course like everything in this lineage is a hominin, but it's not this nice straight line. In fact, it looks something more like this picture that's showing right here on slide 3, that it's very complicated. There are clearly species that branched off into different evolutionary trajectories, and then branched off again, and then eventually died out, and there's still some gaps of things we're not sure about. This is one of the great things about science, changing with new evidence. So, we at any point in the last, like 100 years thought, okay, we know everything, and then they find another fossil, like, whoa, okay, and then another fossil, and then another fossil. And like, in fact, in 2006, they found some really great stuff. We'll talk about that, I think, on another PowerPoint. And then even just a couple years ago, they found some new stuff. And so this is the point of this, the Letty Gararu, that for paleoanthropology, we're always finding new stuff, and when we think we know the full picture, even we're like, oh, it's really complicated, but we think we kind of understand these evolutionary relationships and who's related to who, and the time and the location, geography, we get something new, we're like, oh, that doesn't maybe completely change what we thought, but it definitely adds another piece. You're like, okay, now I'm seeing the fuller picture and a fuller picture, and so it's very interesting. So, and then, okay, so then the 4th bullet point down, anagenesis versus cladogenesis. I think we might have talked about that in this class. But basically, do you have an event where one species is slowly evolving into a new one over time, or do you have like a branching event? That's the only difference. And of course, you're going to see a combination of these. Okay, so slide 4. So when we're talking about the genera, the point of this slide is I have recall the species concepts. So remember, we had the biological species concept, the recognition species concept, the ecological species concept, and those are only the 3 that we talked about in this class. There are many. But think about kind of extending that into like, how do we define a genus? And so there have been multiple ideas about this. Like we understand, like when we can kind of conceptually understand or visually see like nature kind of grouping animals, but when we try to put like with our human mind and our human ways of categorizing, and determining and characteristics, like it gets a little more, especially when you're getting to more specific, like a genus or a species. But most would agree that a genus, you could have multiple species in a genus. Typically, a genus is a group that has like a very similar adaptive niche. And basically what that means is they have a unique way of doing something, or a unique way that they have adapted like morphologically to something that another group who might be closely related to them doesn't quite have that same niche. Oh, and like I put, like, individuals are not born with labels. Like, we like to try to label it and organize it, but it's not as if a new species is like, there's like, oh, I'm Paranthropus, or now I'm Australopithecus. Like, that's not how it works in nature, We try, so we can understand it, we try to kind of categorize it and name it that way, but it's not really how nature works exactly. Okay, so slide 5. Recall those ideas of cladistics versus evolutionary taxonomy, about like how we're understanding the evolutionary relationships, how we're understanding speciation as well. So there are definitely some current debates, and I think we'll get into this not in this PowerPoint. This is just a precursor. I think in the next one, or in the one on the genus Homo, we'll talk about this a little more. And I say that right there, the genus Homo. There's definitely some debates about like how are we distinguishing one species from another? Can we? Are we giving everything a new species name? Should we be? So just kind of think of that idea. Slide 6. So this is important to remember as we start talking about these early genera, that this is all taking place in Africa. Sometimes in South Africa, sometimes like in East Africa, but it's all occurring in Africa. We don't see anything in our lineage out of Africa for millions of years. So those first in our lineage, hominins, they are existing in Africa, different parts of Africa, and some species are existing around the same time in similar parts or different parts, but it's all still happening in Africa. I'll be very clear about when we see species actually leaving Africa. So it's all in Africa. Origins in Africa. Slide 7. So once again, this picture I've drawn, chimps, humans, last common ancestor. We're talking about these very, very early genera, and I'm giving you a very brief overview because for a few reasons. Well, one, like, probably the main reason is we don't have a lot of specimens. We have a handful, and we have enough to have a discussion, and there's enough obviously for them to put it in your textbook, that we have some idea of something that's going around. But right around this time, like in our early lineage and then in the early chimp lineage, there's not a lot of fossil information. We don't really know right around that split what's kind of happening. We have very little information, so I can't talk about it for like an hour on a lecture because we don't have that much. Like, and this is an introductory course too, so I'm just going to give you some basic information. As we get more and more closer to modern times, we have more and more in the human lineage. We have more specimens, so we can talk much greater detail. But for these few, so we have these 3 names. Luckily we're not in class. I'm not going to ask you to pronounce them. Sahelanthropus, Auroran, and Ardipithecus. We would consider these 3 different genera. So remember, genera is plural for genus. So we're going to talk very, very briefly about these 3. Okay, so go to slide 8. Okay. Here is the type specimen for Sahelanthropus chedensis. So I have one question here, what do you notice about this type specimen? So if you're looking at that picture, now I've only shown you a handful of skulls in this class. We're going to see a lot more in these upcoming PowerPoints, but you've only ever seen a few. So I'm just assuming that you have a very general idea what a skull looks like, or the few that we've seen here, maybe you've seen some in other classes. So don't stress too much about that, but just think, is there anything that pops out to you? If I told you that species right there, that skull, is something in our lineage that's moderately closely related to us, would that surprise you? Why or why not? I know you're seeing just one picture and it's 2-dimensional, it's from one angle, but is there anything that pops out to you? So hopefully you notice a few things. One, while it's missing quite a few teeth, you can still see some, and the teeth, while not massive, are still fairly moderate size. But of course, this is no surprise. It's not as if, if we're looking at our lineage or last common ancestor with chimp, that very first species is going to look just like us. It's not at all. Of course, remember we talked about with the previous one I'm blanking, the suite of traits for hominins, that they didn't all occur. So that idea of Mosaic evolution, not a force of evolution, but a conceptual idea, that they didn't all occur at the same time and they didn't occur at the same rate. So even though we could say things like bipedalism, big brains, less prognathism, no CP3 honing complex, thick enamel, what's the other one? Parabolic dental arch, we can say those 6 features characterize us as a group. It's not as if all 6 of those traits happened right at the beginning. They didn't. And it's not as if they all kind of occurred at the same rate. We know that's not true. Some kind of appeared earlier on a little bit. Some happened slowly, like big brains didn't really happen. It's like a slow progression, versus bipedalism happened much earlier and kind of happened very quickly. So even though those 6 traits characterize our lineage, they didn't all happen at the same time and they didn't happen at the same rate. So you can imagine those very first in our lineage might have some defining features, like for example, they could be like bipedal, but they might still have small brains. So that's what you should be seeing in this picture, small brains. You should see that really big brow ridge, like very large brow ridge, very ancestral feature. The teeth, like I said, are still like a moderate size. So even just from this one picture, hopefully those things pop out to you. Brain is still small, very large brow ridge. There's no mandible, but you can still see the teeth, and the upper teeth are still fairly like, medium, moderate size. Let me see the next one. So if you go to slide 9, just a little more information about this species. So don't stress about knowing the exact date or location. Obviously I'd love it if you learn that, but my hope, I don't want you, that the point of this class and the point of this section isn't for you to memorize a bunch of geography. That's not the point of this class, or the dates. I hope that you have a very general idea. If I asked you, for example, describe general trends along the hominid lineage, you understand, okay, Sahelanthropus was earlier on, Australopithecines were a little later, and genus Homo was a little later after that. Like, I hope you understand like general kind of timelines. But I'm never going to ask you to regurgitate dates and stuff like that. Don't stress. Okay, so if you're looking at this slide, you see that some of the ancestral features that this one still has, thin enamel, and like I already showed you, like the teeth are still moderate size. And then I have here bipedal ? So for this, because we have so little evidence, like when you have, if you're only looking at 2 or 3 individuals, versus if you had like 200 or 300 individuals, you could say, okay, whether it's this species or another species, you can say, okay, if we only have 2 or 3, there's evidence of something, and we're pretty sure, but we need to kind of have more evidence to back it up. So when you have, a sample size of like 200 or 300, you're like, okay, clearly this group is, bipedal, this group has large brains, this group, whatever it is, whatever the features you're looking at. So for Sahelanthropus, because we have so little, and part of the skull, like part of the features that we have are more broken than would be ideal, which is common among fossils. You see some debate in paleoanthropology of people saying, well, it seems as if it's probably bipedal, but people are reluctant to say, oh yes, like for sure, like we know with like, the genus Homo, with Australopithecines or Paranthropines, where it's like there's so much evidence, like there's no denying it. So it's just a kind of question mark, only because we need more information. And then you see this little chart I made that it has, it shows where Sahelanthropus might be on that. So like right at the split, right after the split, and there's actually this, has been hypothesized that maybe, I think I'm gonna sneeze. Like maybe Sahelanthropus isn't actually the first hominin, maybe it's actually the first, or it's actually the last common ancestor. So then there's this debate. It could fit either way, and the only thing that will make the determination is when we get more information, more evidence. Okay, so slide 9. Auroran tugenensis. Once again, you can see the time, you can see the date, so around the same time, so right after the split, right around the time of the split, the location in Kenya. So some of the ancestral features, so still has a moderate sized canine, but definitely not as large as we'd seen in previous, species. And now evidence of them being bipedal, which is like a defining characteristic of hominins, and thick enamels. You're like, okay, we're seeing some stuff. Auroran looks like, right time, right place, right features. It's, in our lineage, but just like before, when you have, not as much evidence, we need more. And I wouldn't be surprised in the next, decade if these 3 that we're talking about get rearranged, or we get more evidence, we understand them a little differently. So, okay, so slide 11, Ardipithecus, so the third one. So, oh, I see a mistake. That's not 58 million. It should say 5.8 million. Ethiopia, and that's where I was. So if you recall from like the very first PowerPoint I posted for this class, that the introduction one, that I had been in Ethiopia back in December and January. So an amazing experience. In fact, I was just thinking about the other day, like I was having coffee with someone, and they were like, oh, coffee. And I was like, you do not know coffee until you've had Ethiopian coffee in Ethiopia. Like, I've always liked coffee, but I've never been like a huge coffee person, but I definitely have enjoyed it. So when I went there, of course, I'm like, I want to try it. It's like, like one of their number one exports, and it's supposed to be like amazing. And so you have it there, like in a local coffee shop, like the real coffee. It's not like you guys can just travel to Ethiopia and find out, but if you ever get the opportunity, I'm telling you, it is amazing. It is so amazing. I mean, the food, everything there's amazing. Everything there's amazing. Okay. Tangent. Okay, so here you can see in the picture of this individual again, still small brain, and now we have part of the mandible as well. The teeth are definitely large, medium to large. They're not as big as we'd seen in some other species, but they're definitely not like small like ours. But like, recall that this is how we would see it. Teeth, we see our teeth, we have the parabolic dental arch, we have smaller teeth. That's going to happen, over time. And we already kind of see a reduction in the size already. But the brain is still small, as would be expected. And a couple other interesting things so first, look at this little, where it says ancestral features. It says thin enamel. This is really weird because, thick enamel is a characterizing feature of hominins. Now, it would make sense with the first one, if we agree that Sahelanthropus was the first hominin, that it had thin, and then maybe after that we'd see thick, And we do see thick with Auroran, but then suddenly with Ardipithecus we see thin again, so something's not quite right here. And it has a divergent hallux, or divergent big toe. And we know at this point, like, they're bipedal. Anything in our lineage is bipedal, or should be mostly bipedal. Now, could they still have that divergent big toe and still be bipedal? Yes. But it's just interesting to note. But it seems as if based on the skull that they were, like with the foramen magnum, they were bipedal. So many have hypothesized, and you can see this in the little paint, thing I drew, that maybe they weren't even in our lineage. Maybe they're a third split, like right around this time, a lot was going on ecologically, and we have a last common ancestor, and this was just not even anything in our lineage, it was a whole different branch, but just didn't really go anywhere, died out or something. Could be. Like I said, we want to have these nice little charts in nature, and that's not really how it works. Some of the stuff we may never know. We can only kind of, hypothesize about, and hopefully we get more evidence to support, one of these ideas or not, and we'll go from there. But just know, like I said, these are the three that many would at least include enough to say they might be in our lineage, and we should talk about them because some of the evidence is pointing to it. Although, like I said before, not as much evidence as we have for the later stuff. And slide 12. So this is just a little more on the geography. You can see, like, I highlighted, like, where I was. I was at Addis Ababa. That's where I was, like, in the middle of the country. But there's a lot of stuff in this area. So my advisor, he goes there and does, like I was there. I was in the capital. It was like a major metropolitan city. I was working at a museum. I mean, it's definitely culturally different than here, but it wasn't like a huge difference, versus my advisor goes to the same region, but goes out into the field and actually digs and stuff. I haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. But there's a lot in this area, because like here, based on this, what I've listed on the slide, there's just a lot, like geographically, climatically, that things preserve fairly well there, and there's a lot of stuff we have found, and so it's a great place to look. Okay, so that's it this is like the shortest one I've ever done. So but I knew it would be just a quick introduction to those first few genera, and I will see you guys. I'm probably going to record it right now. I'll see you guys on the next one.